Everybody is hearing me?
Yeah, we are
All
here.
right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, clear. All right,
Thank you.
to begin.
Hi, sir, finally, and
So good evening to our lecturer, Mr. Bisoon, and fellow classmates. This evening, we will be presenting on Chapter 6, and that's integrity and moral purpose. This presentation will be conducted by myself, Janelle Springer, and I would be examining the first element of this chapter, followed by Imani Johnson, who would be presenting, as well as Tishona Jones, who would be doing the third element of this chapter. Now, this topic is a very crucial topic, and I say this because being able to uphold integrity and moral purpose not only applies to our profession within an organization, but it also applies in our daily lives. And at all times, we must act with honesty, honor, and truthfulness, right? So the lesson objectives, by the end of this lesson, you would be able to understand and discuss the process of creating and sustaining an ethical organizational environment. You'll also be able to analyze and understand the moral dimensions of transforming the leadership theory. And lastly, you'll be able to discuss the ethical influences individuals have on their organizations through behavior modeling. So what is integrity? Right, so you all don't have to answer, right? This is just to feed your thought process. When you think of the word integrity, what do you think characterizes the integrity of a person? What characterizes our politicians of Trinidad and Tobago to act with integrity? What about the doubles vendor, the student in college, or the employee on a job? All right, let's have a look at of a definition by Waters. He goes on to say that integrity means being honest and having strong moral principles. A person with integrity behaves ethically and does the right thing even behind closed doors. So we don't want to do the right thing when we know we are being evaluated, right? We want to make sure that we're doing the right thing at all times, regardless. So do you have everyday integrity? So Zaria, would you inform Akasha of too much change you received?
Yeah, I would.
You're right. And what about you, Kareem? Would you betray someone's trust or cheat for an exam? Honest?
No, I would not.
All right.
At least I hope so.
All right, so let's look at a situation, right, guys? So while I'm moving on, I would like you all to just, put yourself in the character's shoes. We're going to examine a situation with 3 characters, right? And at the end, we will discuss. So meet Bob. He is the owner of a car rental service called Rent My Ride. And this is Harry. He's a college student and needs a summer job to help pay his tuition fees. He decided to apply at Bob's business. Mrs. Moon is on her way to Bob's firm to rent a vehicle. She arrived and saw a bus that would be perfect for her family trip. So Harry then walks out and he assists her. He checks the vehicle, but he realizes there are lots of issues with the bus. So he then decides to inform his boss. So here we see Harry scratching his head because he knows his problems, right? So when he goes to his boss, this is his boss' response. He says, Harry, listen, we need the funds from this rental. You don't have to tell the customer about your observations. Once you complete this service, I would be able to give you an early paycheck. So Harry being a yes person, he agrees with his boss and he completes the sale, and he watched Mrs. Moon slowly drive away with his vehicle, with the vehicle. So what are your thoughts on this, guys? Let's start with Harry. How do you all think Harry feeling right now? I know if it was me, I have a conscience. I would be feeling terrible knowing that I give this vehicle to someone, right? And the vehicle has serious problems, right? So what do you all think about that? How do you all think Harry is feeling?
He feeling remorseful. He contemplating.
Yes,
He should have told her.
exactly. And let's look now at Bob. Now here with Bob, we could clearly see that Bob just seeking his own interests. He doesn't care about anybody else. All he cares about is his pocket. And the thing is, this exists today in organizations. We all go through this, right? And I just want to add that there are most of us like Harry. Most times we know we should be doing the right thing. However, we often let the power of managers make choices that are not ethical. And hence, with this practice, we fail each time to act with integrity. Because after all, he's the person who may have hired you, or he's the person who probably signing off on a paycheck. So the question is, if you see situations like these in an organization, do you bite your tongue and let the company deal with it, or do you come straight out and tell your boss that they are wrong? So this brings us to the first element of this chapter: creating and sustaining an ethical organizational environment. So if we want to create and sustain an ethical organizational environment, Nash states that individuals must have 4 qualities. And these qualities are necessary to advance the ethical standards in an organization. So here we are seeing critical thinking skills, right? So what we mean when we say critical thinking skills, these are the skills to analyze and convey the ethical components of a problem. So once we can think critically, we would be able to weigh out facts and draw conclusions when that time arises, right? And next, we're seeing a high degree of integrity. So we must uphold our integrity and stand up for our personal and professional ethics in the working world as well as everyday life, right? We will be battling forces of opposition that go against doing what is right. So therefore, we must have that courage, and we would be speaking about courage later on in this element. The ability to see situations from others' perspective. And what does this mean? Well, this means showing that genuine concern for others, right? And when you think about it, it's not just only helping others to grow, but you're also training yourself to think and see things in a multidimensional way. And this has its benefits because now you can understand ways how to solve different problems, right? And lastly, we have personal motivation. So leadership is about doing the right thing, not just doing things right, right? And I think it is truly crucial for us to ask ourselves this one question when we're in a situation: am I doing the right thing? So you are maybe asking yourself, why these 4 qualities? Why are they so important? Why critical thinking skills? Why integrity? Why showing concern for others and doing the right thing? Well, the first element of this chapter is about creating and sustaining an ethical organization. And if we are sustaining what we've created, in other words, strengthening and maintaining the good ethical practices, then one has to be able to be a critical thinker, to draw conclusions, be honest and true, to uphold integrity, help others to grow so that everyone grows, and also to helping others to be motivated and doing the right thing. Because in the end, this ensures a positive work environment for everyone. So whilst we may want to create and sustain an ethical environment, not everyone in the organization is willing to do the right thing. Therefore, we must be prepared to receive criticisms, right? And when this happens, we don't, as people let's put it, fight fire with fire. We just want to retaliate. No, we don't do that, right? We hold our heads up and we continue to do what is right, continue to empower, right? We'll also see members revolt. So members in a group or organization may rebel if they don't agree with your principles and ethics. And then we'll have a decline in membership. So we may see members wanting to leave if they somehow feel like things are not going their way. However, there are strategies the organizations can use to create and sustain an ethical climate. And we will be looking at those strategies. Right, so we're going to look at the relational leadership model. So let's put theory aside for a bit. Let's have a look at this diagram. And we just want to pay attention to the details. And when you pay attention to the details, what thoughts come to mind? I will go first, right? And if anybody wants to add to it, please feel free. Now, when I look at this model, I look at the circles and how they are connected to each other. It's like each element needs the other in order to achieve the best possible results. And since the relational leadership model emphasizes the relationship amongst people, it clearly shows why the diagram structure is like, it's like a cohesive unit, right? Because people are working together to achieve a common good, right? So when I look at it, that's what I see. Anybody else wants to add? You all understand the concept behind it?
Yeah, I understand the concept.
All right, so let's read on. Let's examine the characteristics of the relational leadership model. So Conlife and Erickson 2011 states that the relational leadership model is engaging with the world in which the leader holds himself or herself, as always, in relation with and therefore morally accountable to others. Right? It suggests the effectiveness of a leader and relates their ability to develop positive relationships. Right? Another point is it relates to the process of people working together to achieve a common good, right? And this ties back to the diagram, how everything is connected, right? So what do relational leaders do? Relational leaders use empathy skills to empower their team, to build strength in their current skill and develop new ones. They also instill professional growth in their employees. What else can we learn about this model? Well, there are 5 primary components that we all must know, that we must be familiar with, right? The first aspect is purpose. So here you have an individual who is committed to a goal or activity, and they also have the ability to collaborate to find common ground. Next, you have inclusivity, right? And this aspect engages the diverse perspectives, experiences, and social identities, and also places emphasis on empathy. Third, we have empowerment. This model encourages others to be involved and actively work to reduce barriers. And when I say barriers, I mean where you'll have others trying to prevent others from getting involved, right? Because at the end of the day, the aim is to empower, right? We have ethical. So you must be driven by values and standards of leadership, which is good or moral in nature. And lastly, we have process orientation. So in this component, there are processes for greeting a group, maintaining cohesion, and achieving goals through collaborative efforts. So the next strategy is the dimensions of the knowing, being, doing model. Has anyone ever seen this model before? Or heard about it?
Not
Yes.
outside of this class.
Okay,
In
okay.
class.
All right, wonderful. Right, so what this model is all about, right? When you look at this model, what are your thoughts? And for me, again, when I look at the circles, this one kind of different. You see like it's a subset of each other. So I see like math, Venn diagram, you know, but it shows that they all have to work together in order to get the best possible result, right? So this model is crucial because once used, it can help support you in moving towards your goals and the goals of the organization, right? So in this model, we listen to others and try to make sense of a situation. In other words, understanding a situation before acting. And when we act, we do the right thing that is consistent with our personal values and that of the organization. So I'll explain BKD. Being. So being refers to who you are inside. For example, this may be your personal beliefs, your values, and your goals. And each of us, we do have personal values set for ourselves, and we have personal goals, right, that we believe in. Knowing. This refers to the knowledge needed to execute a certain task, as well as knowing how to manage yourself and others to achieve goals. Now, in this element, I like how they say knowing how to manage yourself, not just knowing how to manage others, but knowing how to manage yourself and others. Because, you know, in organizations, it's not like that. The focus is really on managing others, right? And I don't know, for some reason we forget that, you know, we have to also manage ourselves. So I like the fact of this knowing aspect, right? Doing. This is when we act to complete a task. The combination of skills accompanied with the process of doing completes the framework of exemplary leadership. Right? So to sum things up, those models are very effective in organizations to sustain an ethical climate because those relational skills help individuals to grow, to be the best version of themselves. And in the end, when individuals can grow, right, company performance can enhance. So in the end, everybody ends up winning. So let me ask you guys a question. Do you all think that all leaders are good?
Well, no.
No.
Not at all.
No,
No.
not exactly. Not all leaders are good. We are going to discuss toxic leaders. in an organization, right? So I want you guys to have a look at these photos. Have a look. Can you recognize the following leaders? And what can you say about them? Who is that man in the first image there? Kareem, I'm sure Kareem know it.
Which is the first image? The top
The
image?
first image to the top.
The Chavez?
Yes, correct. Now that is Hugo Chavez, right? And he was the Venezuelan former president, right? He's also deceased. What can we say about Hugo Chavez? Well, he was an authoritarian leader because he had a very strong thirst for power, right? And he was also remembered in the Western media for calling George Bush the devil at the United Nations in 2006, right? And to the bottom left, we have Jacob Zuma, former president of South Africa, right? And my, he is known for allegations of corrupt and unethical behaviors, right? Multiple corruption scandals, including the South African arms deal fiasco, rape allegations, and money laundering. So maybe when you all get time, you all could look up on Mr. Zuma, right? Some really interesting facts, right? And the last image, who can make a guess?
Saddam Hussein.
Right, Saddam Hussein, the boogeyman, right? So he was known as the boogeyman of the Bush eras in the US, right? So he was charged with crimes against humanity and thus executed, right, by hanging. So not all leaders are good leaders. They're also bad leaders. And Blumen, he goes on to state that a toxic leader is a leader who engages in numerous destructive behaviors and who exhibits certain dysfunctional personal characteristics. So this photo, right? I chose this particular photo because at the end of the day, this is really what does happen. You just feel like if you're going to get eaten. But that's how I just feel. I don't know about all it, but sometimes in organizations when it's overbearing and you have a leader who is so aggressive and they're not encouraging and all they're doing is just, making your day worse than how it really supposed to be. And most times you tend to feel like there's nothing that you could do, right? Sometimes you walk around whole day with your head hang downwards, right? When you should be walking upright. You're just gloomed, right? And we experience this in organizations. So what could we say about this type of leadership? Well, it is destructive to members of a team and workplace. So due to the destructive behavior of toxic leaders, they leave lasting damages, right? And the damages could be emotionally because you tend to suffer, verbal abuse, right? And you have leaders who demoralize individuals. And at the end of the day, it does not encourage teamwork, right? Selfish abuse of power. Some leaders, they feel so powerful. They feel that they can do anything they wish and not be engaged in corrupt activities or even allow their own members to fall, right? And most times, most of them does enjoy doing it, right? Have their own self-interest. So some toxic leaders they are concerned about their personal gain, and most times they disregard employees' feelings, right? I have experienced that many times, right? Peers and teams in an organization will encounter difficulties to thrive. So, in a nutshell, there is no way teams in an organization can thrive if they are undergoing toxic behavior from leaders, right? Because in this setting, members feel dissatisfied and they'll feel no longer empowered to work, right? So nobody could really thrive in an organization that, you know, have these things going on. So as a result, there are effects of the toxic leadership. Workplace bullying. Anybody experience workplace bullying already?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Would you like to share with Cesaria?
No.
Okay. Well, the person who say yes, would you like to share with us your experience?
Well, this is Avalon. For one,
Hi,
I did experience workplace bullying when I
Mhm.
started a new job.
Right.
Because I was quiet and shy, and I never used to talk much. And then there was a certain culture in the organization. So I used to get the effects of it. I don't want to go into it, but it was not a nice experience.
Right. And
Yeah.
I understand how you feel. Right. In my organization, the one that I worked for, it was more or less verbal abuse, right? Coming to work every morning, and I should say all of the bosses, all of the leaders, they were verbally abusing every single staff, right? And when I say verbally abusing, obscene language, right? And we had to deal with that. We were young, you know, so we were like, we took it, you know, we went to our desk and we continued to work, right? So we didn't understand that, okay, you don't have to sit down and take this, right? But we grew from it and we lived, right? Burnout or depression, and most of us go through this, right? Depression especially, right? Rumination, when you tend to play negative events in your mind over and over and over, especially on the job, you end up stressed, right? And many people go through this, right? So then you have job dissatisfaction. So you will feel, of course, you will not feel happy. You know, you wouldn't feel empowered working in an organization with this kind of demeanor, toxic leadership, right? You may want to leave, right? From the time you sit down on your desk, you're not motivated to do nothing, right? Then we have counterproductive work behavior. So this behavior goes against the interests of the organization, right? So all these are effects of the toxic leadership that maybe most people experience, right? And most of the times we feel that we have to sit down in it when we really don't have to. So class, how can we know offhand that we may be working under a toxic leader? Well, we can spot toxic traits in a leader the following ways, right? So a quick telltale mark is when a leader leaves you worse off than you would, right? So you may start to work for somebody and then you start to experience intimidation, you start to experience verbal abuse, you start to experience bullying, and it just goes on and on and on. And most times, nothing is being done about it, right? Violating, you have leaders who violate basic standards of human rights, right? On free speech, you know, we all have rights, right? And we are free to voice our concerns and believe in our own values, right? Then you have leaders who mislead followers through deliberate untruths issues and problems. So there are leaders who deceive and deliberately misdiagnose situations, and this usually causes conflicts within the organizations, right? Then you have insatiable ambition of leaders to place sustained power and wealth above their followers' well-being, right? And you see this happening often, right? Money is always on top before everything else, right? So some leaders, they use their power and their wealth to utilize resources, and they refuse to address their followers' needs, right? So they don't want to see anyone aspiring but themselves. And then you have those with the enormous egos, right? That blind leaders to the shortcomings of their own character. So you'll have leaders who are egotistic, and hence most times they believe that they are doing their job effectively, and that they ain't doing nothing wrong. But the thing is, they can't see that their demeanor is causing issues for others. Then you have reckless disregard for the cost of their actions to others, as well as themselves. And lastly, you have cowardice when dealing with difficult choices. So here leaders tend to avoid having to make difficult choices, and they don't want to face consequences. Why is that? Well, I think it's because they lack courage, right? And they like the easy way out. These kind of leaders. So how can we deal with a toxic leader when we spot them? So these are ways that we can deal with it. One, keep control of your reaction. So like I was saying before, right? Don't retaliate. So you may not be able to control how your manager acts, right? But you have to remember, at the end of the day, you are in control of your own reaction to your leader's actions, right? So we must not retaliate, right? That will only cause the situation to worsen. Two, clarify instructions, right? So when we make assumptions about what we believe the toxic leader wants, this may cause misunderstandings, right? So it's best to ask for clarification, preferably in written form, right? Whenever in doubt. Set professional boundaries, and this one is really important. Set the professional boundaries, right? So it's always important in any organization you work in to always keep the relationship between you and your leader professional, right? By doing so, you will protect yourself and the personal life from toxic behavior. 4, document. Right? This is something that I always do. And in the field of accounting, if you don't document, you can get yourself in a lot of problems, right? So I always like documentation. So if anything happens, it's right there for proof, right? So there may be instances where your toxic leader makes requests, but you don't agree with them. So when a conflict or misunderstanding occur, you have proof of documentation, like a written confirmation via email, right? And attempt to help instead of judge. So basically, help others around you. And this will help you to achieve more. When everyone is really thriving together as a team, no one will have time to spend on conflict or drama. So we want to ensure we can promote ethical behavior in the workplace, right? Can anyone think of some ways that we can promote that type of behavior in the workplace? Anything at all? We'll go into the elements after. What ways can we promote ethical behavior in the workplace? Anyone?
Well, probably by having rules on behavior. So I guess in the workplace you have certain rules like regarding different things like your dress code or
Right.
whatever else. You should probably have like certain rules on like how you should behave.
Right. Nice. Thank you, Zaria, for that contribution. So we'll go on to see what the organizations can do. So recognize and create. Right? Organizations can recognize and create awards for members, right? Who help sustain an ethical environment. Right? So employees in an organization, they like to be rewarded. They like to be recognized for accomplishments. Right? And what this does, it continues to motivate new and existing employees, right? And this enhances the performance on a job holistically, right? I remember when I was working, I really did enjoy, the rewards. And I mean, who doesn't, right? So then we'll move on to address unethical behavior. So many times in organizations, you'll find unethical behavior being slid under the door. It's like, sometimes it's like no one has the courage to even stand up for what is right. But the truth is, we must address unethical behavior if we want an ethical environment. B, be a role model. If you want others to uphold organizational values and standards, well, the organization must be setting a possible example for followers. Offer training to employees, right? Training for employees allow them to personally develop their skills, right? Where they may fall short, additional programs enhances their knowledge. Communicate. Communicate effectively to ensure ethical expectations are met, right? And again, effective communication is like the most important factor in an organization, right? However, our individual values and principles does not always match up to an organizational standard. They tend to clash. And when this happens, what do we do? What do we do when the values and the principles clash? Well, we have three choices. When values and principles clash with the organization standard, we can ignore or put up with the situation. 2, address the situation. Or 3, leave the organization. And most of us will just leave the organization, but that's not really the thing to do, right? We have to address the situation, because think about it. You leave the organization and then you end up with the same problem when you reach the next organization. So it's better to deal with it, right? When you deal with it, you know how to deal with other situations like it, right? When they come about. So there's an acronym I have to the bottom right of the screen. It's called IAL, Individuals Who Aspire and Lead, right? In order to remember it. But the thing is, the big question is actually, do you have the moral courage to do the right thing? Right? Especially when you want to address a situation. Do you have that courage? So Kidder, 2005, goes on to define moral courage. He states, it's the quality of mind and spirit that enables one to face up to ethical challenges firmly and confidently without flinching or retreating. So to have courage, you must have an awareness of danger. Now, why is this crucial? Having an awareness of danger. So with moral courage, there's a risk aversion. It requires the willingness to take risks. And so we must be mindful of our surroundings and identify potential threats and dangerous situations. Willingness to endure hardship. We must be willing to endure hardship, right? Once we start addressing situations and standing up for ourselves, the opposing forces will give us a hard time, right? I've also experienced this as well. So what we can do is set up personal, we could set up personal mantra. My own was never give up, right? Despite what, right? And you can also use senses of humor to take us through the day, right? Some people like listening music that, you know, takes them through the day as well. And it really does help, right? Uphold principles and put them into action. So despite what, right? Anything that you might be going through on the job, you uphold your principles and continue to put them into action. So here we have some images of some well-known individuals, Mr. Lincoln, Mr. Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, and Dr. Martin Luther King, right? So all of them, they had moral courage. They took on challenges and expressed their chivalry so firmly, and they continue to uphold their values and principles until the very end, right? So this is what we must do. We must have that courage, especially when we know that we want to continue standing up for what is right. We have to have that courage, just like these people here. So, classmates, this is the end of the first element. I want to thank those of you who contributed and all of you who are listening. I will now pass you on over to Miss Imani Johnson, who will be examining the second element of this chapter.
Hi, good night, everyone. My name is Imani Johnson once again, and tonight I will be doing the second element, which is moral dimensions of transforming leadership theory. Next slide, please. So, what is transformational leadership? It is a process in which leaders and followers raise each other to higher levels of morality and motivation. It reaches moral dimensions when the leaders and participants are elevated by mutual influences on one another. It is about the relationship and influence between leaders and followers. So leaders are there to encourage us. They're there to help us accomplish our goals. They're also there to understand people's desires. Next slide, please. So, class, what do you think are some more responsibilities of a leader? Anybody can answer.
Motivating their staff.
Yes, correct. They can also set goals, they provide recognition and support, and they also model fairness and integrity, because of course you can't just be biased to one person and then another person you just doing a completely different thing. So next slide, please. So being a leader is someone with a vision and the path to realizing it. A leader is someone who ensures their team has support and tools to achieve their goals. Also, being a leader sometimes means that you have to do something that you may not want to do, like confronting reality. But you also, at the same time, you have to have enough confidence. You cannot be a people pleaser. Just like let's look at the situation that Janelle was talking about before. So Bob, he tried to sell the car to the lady, and also, even though like he knew it was wrong, just because his boss was saying he had to do it, he still went on and do it. And like, we don't know if the lady, that could have made her crash or something bad else could have happened to her. So let's look at some examples of successful leaders. Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, Albert Einstein, and Oprah Winfrey. Of course, we all know about these because they're so successful. So what makes them so successful? They helped us ensure that we accomplish our goals. They were there to inspire us and motivate us, just like someone said there. Next slide, please. So, last and foremost, the 5 dimensions in transformational leadership: vision, inspirational communication, supportive leadership, intellectual stimulation, and personal recognition. So let's start with the first one. So vision. Vision is the expression of a desired picture of the future based around organizational values. Transformational leaders can help their employees become who they're supposed to become. So question. So for the younger persons, who do you want to become? Well, personally, I would like to become a business development manager, which means that I would help businesses grow. What about you all? Anybody wants to become anything?
Can you repeat that question, please?
Repeat the question, please.
Oh,
I'm
so
lost.
what would you all like to become? Who do you all want to become for the younger persons?
I think you are just speaking a little too fast.
Oh, yeah, I'm so sorry.
Don't worry about it. To become the younger people, see, for me, I always wanted, like, for making music and thing. Like, I always wanted to be someone who could inspire so many people and have so many people be, like, so entranced and help people get through their day. So much so that, like, I'm sure everybody knows who XXX Tentacion is, the rapper who died. For him, he had people outside the hospital, though, like hundreds of thousands of people outside waiting for him to see if he'll be okay because of how many people he inspired. That's where I want to get to. Like, I want to inspire that many people. That is just, I leave a mark on the world, if so to say.
That is a really nice career and reason, Corey. So let's move on to the inspirational communication. So inspirational communication is the expression of positive and encouraging messages about the organization and statements that build motivation and confidence. Transformational leaders continually seek to understand changing factors that motivate people to do their best work. Supportive leadership. Supportive leaders express concern for their followers and take into their individual needs because, of course, everybody is not the same person. Everybody has different thoughts. Everybody has different needs. So a leader will make sure to follow all of that and bring it all together. Intellectual stimulation. Intellectual stimulation enhances employees' interest and awareness of problems, and it helps to increase creative problem-solving skills. And the last one, personal recognition. Being a leader means that you have to give your employees personal recognition, such as praising them, saying that they did a good job, saying like stuff like that after they complete a specific task. This helps to boost your employees' confidence. This helps to make sure that for the next task, like, okay, right, like I know that my boss is going to praise me after this, basically, and like I know that I'm going to do my best work after this. Thank you so much, everyone. That was my presentation. Do you all have any questions or anything? Did you all understand everything?
Somewhat. I understand the information, yeah.
Do you have any questions? Which part didn't you understand?
I have no questions about it. It's just, I still deciphered it.
Anyone else or?
So far, so good, madam.
Okay, great. Well, now I will let you move on to the last and final element, and Tishona Jones will present that. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Imani. Hi, everyone. Are you all hearing me?
Yes, we are.
Yeah, we hear you.
Yes, we
All
are.
right, thank you. I'm Tashona, and I'll be presenting on the last part of our topic, which deals with the ethical influences that participants have on their organizations through behavior modeling. So, what is behavior modeling? Next slide, please. Well, if we were to dissect the term behavior modeling and focus on modeling, we'd know that it's derived from role model, excuse me. So what are we modeling on a daily basis? Are we modeling honesty? Are we modeling respect? Are we modeling integrity? And as a leader, you need to be very careful with behavior modeling, because whatever you put out there or whatever you model is exactly what your followers or your team members or whatnot they're going to follow or what they're going to imitate, whether they're cognizant of that or not. So moving on to the third slide. So leaders don't always model good behavior. They can display both ethical and unethical behavior. So let's take, for example, the scenario that Janelle previously spoke about with Bob, the owner of Rent My Ride, and his customer, Mrs. Moon. Next slide, please. So I'm going to look at another example of behavior modeling. Next slide. Next slide. Right. So, a student of the events and planning committee that wants everyone to feel included and equally empowered in the decision making will practice sharing power among participants. So, now if we were to look closely, we'd see that this student is modeling teamwork. This student, he or she is modeling respect for each participant in the committee, regardless of their status. And they're modeling equal opportunity. Now I'm going to move on to another example, my third example. Next slide, please. So here we have a manager who's a Christian by religion. So he or she pays respects to her employees, his or her employees that are Muslims and Hindus, etc., by observing their holidays. So he or she wears the respective clothing that's associated with the religion. They indulge in the delicacies and overall shows an equal appreciation for the religion, even though he or she is a Christian. And if we were to analyze this scenario, we'd see that this manager is modeling to employees to be tolerant, to be respectful towards other religions, although they may belong to another faith. And this brings me to my last example. Next slide, please. So we're going to switch things up a bit. So let's use a high school. Now, the students of this high school are only allowed to participate in extracurricular tournaments if their GPA is above 2.0. So the basketball team star player, he doesn't place much emphasis on his academics. So in other words, he's slacking off. And he usually maintains like a 1.4 to 1.6 GPA. Now, despite the rule that's supposed to be applicable to all students, he's still allowed to play because he scores the most goals for the team. And as I've said before, leaders really need to be careful with the behavior that they're modeling, because by allowing the student to play, they're sending a negative message to his classmates that it's okay for people in authority to enable them or to bend the rules for them because they're successful. And that's really not some good values to be teaching impressionable students, because they'd be going out into the real world, as people would call it, soon. Moving on to my next slide. So now I'm going to gear this slide towards the class. Can anyone else think of any other examples of behavior modeling? Anybody? I could hear a pin drop here, boy.
I can't think of one off the top of my head, that's the thing.
All right. Well,
No,
are you
need
all
some thought there.
understanding the concept?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, I'm just making sure that I get my topic across. All right, so I'll move on now. The next slide, please. So we're gonna dig a little deeper into behavior modeling and look at it from an external point of view. Because it's not just something that's confined to the walls of an organization or even just limited to one organization. In fact, it exists on a broader spectrum. Next slide, please. Well, you all know that I love an example to illustrate the point that I'm trying to convey. So let's use the Afghan women's football team. Now, I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with the story, but you know, after the Taliban's most recent takeover of Afghanistan in 2021, women partaking in any sporting activities was outlawed. And, the girls of the football team, they were now targets for their previous participation. They now had to flee the country because, they were fearful for their lives. They even said that they were getting death threats, and, so they reached out for international help. Next slide, please. And if you were keeping abreast of this story, you'd know that it caught international attention. And, they said in interviews that other football teams and associations reached out to help them. Other universities offered to assist them. The UK eventually granted them visas, and now they're safely in Portugal because they've been granted asylum there. Next slide, please. And what these organizations or these countries did is that they've modeled empathy, they've modeled humanitarianism, and they've modeled kindness. So it was sort of like a chain reaction in that somebody said, you know what, we need to help these girls. And another institution said, well, we can also help in this way. And they each emulated each other's behavior. And in the end, it produced a positive result. And that's what I mean when I say that it's not just limited to one organization. It expands a lot further than that. So, next slide, please. Y'all are probably tired of my behavior modeling concept. So I'm going to introduce a new concept.
Shauna.
Sorry, go ahead.
Hi. Sorry, I had my hand up, but I don't think you saw it because you were focused on
Probably
your
I didn't.
presentation.
Sorry.
That's okay. So I want to how to put it? Poke the bear a little bit, right? So the story that she gave here with the female footballers and the story that she gave with the student, right? They were by them bending the rules for him to play football. That basically showed that negative model behavior or so forth, right? And on this end here, a rule was passed. Now I do not support the rule at all, but let's just look at it in the sense of based on modeling behaviors following specific rules in place, right? A rule was passed. Females can no longer play football. How come it's not negative if other people enforce or engage them or offer them asylum, which basically allows them to get out of the rule that was placed on them by their country? How come it's not also kindness extended to the student athlete if he's allowed to continue playing his sport? Maybe he's not good at academics and he's better at sports. Why would you let a student suffer in something that he's not absolutely good in, right? And not allow him to shine in other areas. What do you think about that? No, I'm not agreeing that the country shouldn't help. I 100% believe. I'm just showing how, it's kind of like, okay, one can break the rules, one can.
Yeah, I understand exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. What do you think?
And this would be my response date. Well, remember, as I said, with the student and football, he was slacking off. It's not that he didn't have the academic potential, but he was slacking off. He was just lazy. He didn't want to do the work.
Right.
And as for the example with the women's football team, it wasn't just about, for them to play football, for them to practice sports or whatnot. As I said, they said that they were getting death threats and they were fearful for their lives because of their previous participation. If you would listen to the interviews, you'd hear them saying, well, I think that was the coach. She was telling her teammates to, don't let anybody know that they were a part of the football team, hide their identity and whatnot. So it wasn't about them currently playing the sport, but for their previous participation. And I don't think that that's right on any level to be threatening somebody, for something as simple as that, when indeed they weren't breaking the rules previously when the Taliban didn't take over yet.
I agree with you 100%. Do you think now that probably this model behavior is somewhat selective in a sense, and it's not based on a whole, but on a specific situation?
Yeah, I do think that, it's kind of specific to, different situations. Yeah, yeah. Now that I look at it, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Tashana.
Hi.
Hi, this is Alan. I just want to say for Afghanistan, the Taliban, remember, they have their own interpretation of Islam.
Mm-hmm.
Before the US ousted them, women were not allowed to seek an education. Girls were not allowed to go to school. Women couldn't work. Men had to
Mm-hmm.
shave. Men couldn't shave their beards. They had to grow the long Muslim beards. There were strict laws in Afghanistan. Women had to cover themselves with burqas. They could not be seen in public. When the US liberated Afghanistan from them, women were given freedom. They were allowed to do anything. Sikh careers, children were allowed to go to school. Now that the Taliban has taken over, they have re-implemented those previous laws they had instilled before. So that is why the women and them are getting death threats, because they had freedom under the US, and now that is taken away since the Taliban came back. So the Taliban has reinstituted whatever they had before.
Yes, 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 they did. Yes. But did you have like a question or something, or you just wanted to add that?
No, I just wanted to add that just to give you a little history of why the women were
Yeah,
threatened.
familiar with the history of the Taliban and whatnot. Yeah. So that's it.
Yeah, that's it.
Anybody else want to add anything?
That makes me wonder now, is it something right or wrong? Because in their eyes, they are doing something right because that is their law, that is their way of life. But from someone looking on the outside, it's not right.
That's what I'm getting at too, Kanisha. If you're looking at it in that sense, like the law is right, the rules are right, and whatever else is wrong, um, they're basically doing what they're basically doing what you're not encouraging the student to do when you just look at it on the surface. But I understand the entire situation in itself, but when you're looking at it just based on rules, yes or no, right or wrong, based on the culture, based on the laws of the land and different things like that, and who is America to come in and say, and change that? Who is America to come in and encourage that type of um, negative behavior in their eyes? Because women being free in their eyes, that's a negative thing, right? Again, I do not support that, but women being free in their eyes is a negative thing. How come that is now considered kindness, but the same isn't? It's kind of touch and go. That's why I was like, it's something selective, definitely. And with leadership as well, it definitely should be selective. You should take your time to, as you said, the critical thinking and really consider your um your different parts of your teams, which would be, your workers and so forth, and deal with the situation individually. So yeah.
Hi, just to bring some clarification here, the chapter actually treats with this particular issue about behavior modeling because it does a whole section on culture and the assumptions of how culture impacts upon behaviors in different places and tries to bring that into the discussion of how we bring about some sort of what we call the idea really is going to be about how your culture influences your definitions of what is good leadership, what is bad leadership, what is good ethics. Because again, remember we're talking about in this particular presentation, we're addressing the issue of integrity and moral purpose. And what might be moral or just in one country or one culture may not be the same in another country or another culture. And that was something that this chapter also sought to try and give some perspective on. So that may be something that's missing from the discussion overall. Okay, you can continue here from in moral talk.
All right, thank you, sir, and thank you to everybody that made their contribution. So now I'm going to speak a little bit about moral talk. So moral talk is a primary means of introducing morality as it pertains to solving a dilemma. So, we're faced with problems of different nature every day. And I think that moral talk is a very valuable tool for organizations because it brings clarity on as to what is ethical and what is not. So, moral talk is encouraged between leaders and members. Parents and their children would have moral talk, a boss and his or her subordinates would have moral talk. All of this would foster a more ethically oriented environment. Next slide, please. So I'm moving on just to two examples of moral talk. So, for example, in a school, they develop an honor code to ensure that students understand that things like, cheating and bullying and whatnot is unethical. The second example would be that in a workplace, they would formulate a code of conduct and, have frequent discussions with employees to ensure that they understand that what is considered to be ethical and what is considered to be unethical by their organization. So I'd like to move on to my next slide. So I spoke about behavior modeling and moral talk and whatnot. And I think that everyone could identify when I say that every day we're faced with moral dilemmas, and they each require a unique approach in solving them. So that's where the ethical decision making models come into play. So these frameworks serve as guides and they make it a little easier for us to make more morally sound decisions. Next slide, please. So the first model that I'm going to introduce is the 4 right versus right dilemma model. Because sometimes you find yourself in a situation where you need to choose one course of action, but both options seem like the right choice. So hence the name of the model being the right versus right dilemma. And what this model does is that it categorizes dilemmas by its nature to give us a deeper understanding as to what as the problem, and we'd better be able to solve it. So the first element that I'm going to speak about is the truth versus loyalty. Now this is about being honest versus keeping one's word. So telling the truth most commonly means reporting the facts, whereas loyalty focuses on honor or allegiance to a certain friend or person or a certain group or a certain set of ideas. The second element would be the individual versus community dilemma. Now, this deals with compromising the rights of one individual or a possible minority group for the greater good of the community. The third element would be the short term versus the long term. Now, this entails the conflict between the immediate needs of the present and that of those in the long run. And the last element would be the justice versus mercy Now, this is a choice between, as people would say, going by the book and bending the rules. It involves choosing between fairness and equal treatment of everyone, and on the other hand, having compassion and allowing exceptions. So I'm moving on to the next slide. I'm just gonna host a little activity with the class now. I'm gonna display 4 situations, and I would like you all to tell me which dilemma it falls under. I hope that you all were listening to what I was saying just now. So moving on to the next slide. So the first of the scenarios being letting a student who's having trouble at home off easy when homework is not done, or taking further disciplinary actions because those are the rules. So can anybody tell me which dilemma this falls under? Anybody?
See, I can tell you because I have it in my mind, but I don't remember all 4 of them in terms of the exact wording. I remember
Well, you know,
truth.
give me what you have now and I will help you out.
Oh God, it's not the first, it's not the third one. I think it's, what was the second one? What was the second thing on the
The
slide?
second one was the individual versus the community.
You know, it was the 4th then. I know the
Yes,
third one was this was the first one was truth and loyalty. The third one was the thing. I think.
you were correct, you know.
Yeah, the fourth. Yeah, the fourth.
Yes,
Yeah.
it was the 4th one. That would be the justice versus the mercy. So, you know, the teacher has a choice between letting the student off because, you know, he or she understands and empathizes with their situation at home, or do they just follow the rules and, you know, take further disciplinary action, you know, impose justice because, you know, that's the rules and it shouldn't be broken. So the second scenario would be that you saw your friend cheating on a test. You know that it's wrong, but if you tell on your friend, you know your friend will be suspended. So anybody?
I think that's the one of loyalty.
Yes, the truth versus loyalty. That would be the first one. Yes. You know, do you tell the truth because you know that it's wrong, or are you loyal to your friend because that's your friend and you're keeping their secret? The third scenario would be stealing pastries from the village bakery because the owners are rich, and giving it to the homeless people in the community because, you know, they don't have much. Any answers?
What is the second
The
scenario?
second is individual versus community.
Yeah, I think is that.
Yes, and you are correct. So, you know, you think that because these people own the bakery, they already have enough money, they have a house, they have cars and whatnot. And the people on the streets, they don't have anything. So, you know, you're stealing from them, in other words, compromising the rights of those rich people to give to the poor because you think that that's the best thing to do. And the last one would be taking a job that pays more now, but it may not lead anywhere, or take another job that will develop and pay more in the future. Well, I mean,
Long
this is easy enough.
long term versus short term.
It's actually short term versus long term, but yes, you are correct. So that would be the end of my activity. And I'm going on to the next slide now. So now that I've spoken about the dilemma model that classifies problems that by their nature, I'm going to discuss Kidder's 3 principles of ethical decision making. Next slide, please. Now, this model allows you to solve dilemmas by approaching them with 3 contrasting ways of thinking.
I don't.
Janelle,
Honestly,
I'm not sure if you heard me.
This
The next
slide
slide.
need to change.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you. Right. So, firstly, no, it needs to go back. You search too far. I don't know if you could just give us a moment as we sort out this. Right. Thank you. Right. So, firstly, there's ends based thinking. Now, this element is also known as utilitarianism. So, this way of thinking promotes doing whatever provides the greatest good for the greatest number. So, let's take, for example, something as simple as discarding the bad apple before it affects the whole bunch. And that would be a form of ends based thinking because it's what's best for the greater number of apples. The other element would be rules based thinking. Now, this involves sticking to the rules and standing firm on your principles. Because, rules promote order and justice and they're meant to be followed. In other words, they're there for a reason. So it basically means following the rules no matter the consequences. So take, for example, a journalist employing the rules based thinking would publicly name a minor charged with a crime. The last element would be care-based thinking. Now, this way of thinking is characterized by putting love first, by following the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. A manager that's practicing care-based thinking would allow an employee to work a 9 to 5 shift when he or she is supposed to be working 8 to 4 because that employee has disclosed certain personal reasons that require them, to switch. Now this brings me to the last part of my lesson. Next slide, please. And now I'm just going to share with you a few principles that would be quite useful for leaders and members to morally approach the decision-making process. So, you would want to respect autonomy or self-government. You would want to do no harm. You would want to benefit others. You would want to be just and fair in everything that you do. And you want to be faithful. So before I go, I'd like to conclude our presentation. And I'd just like to mention 3 key principles that, you should take away from this lesson. Next slide, please. So you need to have honesty and critical thinking, critical skills to work in an organization. The second would be transformational leadership. Leaders are there to motivate and encourage participants. And the third would be that being a leader means doing the right thing always. As you know, your employees will follow that same behavioral pattern. So, are there any questions?
Not a question, but I think it was a good presentation.
Thank you.
Same, and I'm gonna lie, this presentation is very detailed, and like it was entertaining at points.
Thank you very much. That means a lot.
I also agree. Very good presentation. Excellent.
Thank you. Thank you.
I agree as well. Very good, guys.
All right. So, on behalf of Imani, Janelle, and I, we'd like to thank you so much for your time and attention, and we hope that you really enjoyed our presentation.
Same here.